Hatred is a very interesting thing to observe. It's not a natural emotion or stance. It has to be built and fostered over time. Human beings are fallen and tribal by nature. We're protective over things that we believe in and that we love. But that's not the same thing as hate. Hate's a deeper emotion, one that has to be carefully cultivated to burn brighter and hotter than others. It's my contention that the reason why people hate things is because they hate something within themselves. Hatred is simply a projection of something you feel is insufficient or lacking within you. You don't want to confront that thing, whatever it is. You don't want to deal with it. It's too hard, it's too painful, or a mix of both. So therefore, you take aim at something outside of yourself, outside of your control, and do your best to degrade, destroy, and slander it. There have been no greater evidence of this trend than the phenomenon of Donald Trump and Trumpism. Donald Trump, ever since he took the now infamous ride down his golden escalator, has been hated by all of our most important and powerful institutions and the people that run them for a decade. No one has been more despised, loathed, and vilified than our 45th and 47th president and his supporters that are come along as an attached deal with him. There have been many claimed reasons as to why this posture has been taken towards Trump. He's a racist, they say. He's controlled by Putin, they screeched. He's a threat to democracy, they cried. All of these were used in an attempt to derail Trump's popularity, to remove him from the cultural lexicon. The collusion and coordination of these attacks were effective, nonstop, and vicious. But none of them are true. Trump actually doesn't hate anybody by the color of their skin, or by any other immutable characteristics for that matter. Trump isn't controlled by anybody, particularly a foreign government. Trump is only the second president in American history after Grover Cleveland to be elected in non-consecutive presidential terms twice, with the second one coming after the most definitive political mandate in half a century, notably after the second most slandered campaign in history after Abraham Lincoln, in which he was bankrupted, indicted hundreds of times, almost sent to prison, shot at twice, and hit once. When studying the escalation of hate-based attacks and crimes on Donald Trump, most presciently being the 2 attempts on his life in Florida and Butler, Pennsylvania, there are several trends that stick out. The most notable one, to me, is that all of the most vile attacks posed his way happened when he was on his way to victory the second time, when the writing was essentially on the wall that he would absolutely trounce Kamala Harris, who had just been implanted by the Democratic elites to replace Joe Biden, whose brain had turned to milkshake on national television just a month beforehand. This is a very curious thing to observe. If Trump were really that dangerous, why didn't they try to kill him in 2016? Why didn't they try to pull his real estate files and throw him into federal prison for inflating their values then? Why did they specifically target people like Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, and Roger Stone, some of Trump's closest political allies, and throw them all in federal prison months before the campaign concluded then? They very well could have, but they didn't. And the answer to all of these questions is very clear. Donald Trump, for all of their criticism towards him, has learned from his first term. The danger of 2024 Trump versus 2016 Trump was that 2024 Trump had already been through the ringer. He already knew how the sausage was made. He knew exactly what buttons to press. The key to the political establishment's victories over Trump in his first term were nothing to do with their own intelligence or savvy, of which they possessed very little. They had everything to do with Trump's ignorance, which was now washed away. That terrified them, as it should have. But perhaps even more interestingly, they didn't hate the people around Donald Trump. Even though they despised everything that came out of Trump's mouth, our ruling class was largely pretty fine with the people he surrounded himself with and his closest advisors. Our establishment political class loved the rotation of characters that were in Trump's ear and orbit. People like John Bolton, Nikki Haley, Mark Milley, and Mike Pompeo. Even with someone like Mike Pence, who they claimed to hate based on his Christian faith and pro-life stances, they would very much rather have him than Donald Trump. He was far more reliable and predictable, far more likely to keep their gravy train moving apace. Even more so than the now non-ignorance of Donald Trump, our political elites feared this even more. Trump and Pence now hated each other, Pence's long-seated hatred for Trumpism having spilled over after January 6th. Bolton and entrenched D.C. swamp creatures like him took every opportunity to take potshots at him on cable news. Trump had stated that Haley and Pompeo would not be getting anywhere close to their former places in his new inner circle. Instead of the former D.C. insiders and corporate suits that defined his first term, Trump had ripped it down to the studs and replaced everything. Instead of his daughter Ivanka and son-in-law real estate tycoon Jared Kushner in his ear, his alpha brass-knuckle brawler sons Don Jr. and Eric took their place. Instead of listening to Rupert Murdoch for advice on who to pick as his VP, namely Doug Burgum and Marco Rubio, He listened to Tucker Carlson and picked J.D. Vance. He poached Susie Wiles from the implanted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who ran his campaign masterfully and would soon become his chief of staff. All of these things horrified our ruling class. If enacted, things would be very different this time around. Incredibly different. And not in a good way for them at all. But the horror show had only just begun. After Trump's victory in November, he wasted no time on putting his further dream team into place. Having planned for victory for years, Trump and his transition team had all of their draft picks ready to go. All they had to do was turn in their cards. Team Trump smartly threw their opponents off guard by tossing out their most volatile selection first by announcing Matt Gaetz, the most wild MAGA firebrand and one of Trump's most loyal allies in Congress, as his nominee for Attorney General. After undergoing a weaponization of the prior DOJ not seen before in the history of our country, this was, arguably, Trump's most important pick. And the screeching began almost immediately. Gaetz was too wild even for most congressional Republicans, who began to work internally to disrupt the Gaetz confirmation. The state media panned the selection, branding it as just the latest breed of Trumpian incompetence. However, to their dismay, this is only the Trojan horse, a diversion from what was truly to come. Matt Gaetz never made it to the starting line, leaving Congress to host a show on OAN, and was replaced by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of Florida who worked in the Trump-branded America First Policy Institute. But before Trump's opponents could declare a victory, he flooded the zone with all of his other picks, all of whom were just as, if not more, controversial. Namely, there were 5 of them: Pete Hegseth for the Department of Defense, Tulsi Gabbard for the intelligence community, Kash Patel for the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services. In addition, Elon Musk was appointed to oversee the new Department of Government Efficiency, which served as an outside auditor and data collection system for the entire federal government's budget. Once we're now discombobulated cries from our ruling class, we're now full-throated screams. What's interesting to note is that you never heard a thing about someone like Doug Burgum, for example, being named the Secretary of the Interior and fossil fuel czar. All of the people that were supposedly about quote-unquote climate change and quote-unquote green energy all fell silent when the 5 horsemen of the Trumpocalypse were appointed, as it did with all the other fraudulent social causes they claimed to care about. But they cared a lot about Hegseth, Gabbard, Patel, Kennedy, and Musk. They tried to torpedo each one of them, throwing the book at each individual candidate to get them to back off, shut up, and go away. The amount of hatred and vitriol that was spewed their way was almost uncanny. And so it's worth asking the question, why is this happening and still happening? And in truth, there are very many more individualistic reasons. But there is one reason above all that these 5 share, and one that is far more telling. They refuse to lie. Let's take Pete Hegseth, for example. Earlier this year, Hegseth went on Fox News Sunday, the flagship Sunday show news program on his old network now hosted by Shannon Brehm. Brehm brought him on to talk through developments in the peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, something that Donald Trump had wanted to engage in ever since the war began. People, particularly conservatives, like to believe that Fox News backs Trump all the time, that they are biased towards his agenda with impunity. But this isn't true. Fox News largely views Donald Trump as an inconvenience. They're only willing to tolerate him as long as their package deal of the neocon and liberal agendas come with him, which are largely getting left behind by Trump. Therefore, even Fox News has knives out for the Trump cabinet and have shown on several occasions to use them. And this exact thing happened in this telling encounter with Shannon Brehm and Pete Hegseth. In the interview, Brehm asked her former colleague repeatedly to admit that the Russia invasion into Ukraine in February 2022 was quote-unquote unprovoked. Hegseth refused each time, citing a more nuanced point of view. Russia was absolutely wrong to invade Ukraine and to begin a bombardment of the country. No one really argues that. There are some estimates that place the death toll at nearly 2 million and the amount of displaced at nearly 10 between the two countries. But to say that the Russia invasion was quote-unquote unprovoked, that was a bridge too far for Hegseth, and he made a point in saying so. But yet Brehm pressed in, her producers undoubtedly in her ear prodding her to get Hegseth to budge. And to his credit, he didn't. He knew that even though Russia was wrong for rolling tanks across the Donbass, the West broke its post-Cold War promises time and time again to not expand NATO further to the east, and that the United States government led a coup of the Ukrainian government in 2014 that led to the elevation of Volodymyr Zelensky as the nation's leader. Wrong, absolutely. Unprovoked, the opposite, actually. In the words of Tupac Shakur, I ain't a killer, but don't push me. How about Tulsi Gabbard, whose confirmation hearing to become the Director of National Intelligence, i.e. the overseer of all our nation's spy agencies, was made into a living hell? Gabbard, who was once labeled a Russian asset by the most powerful establishment politician in the world, Hillary Clinton, and was put on a terror watch list by the intel heads, was their former public enemy number one. The government entities that had once colluded to destroy her life were now her employees. During her confirmation hearing, Gabbard was asked many questions and attacked ruthlessly by both sides of the aisle. As Chuck Schumer once honestly stated, the intel agencies have, quote, 7 ways to Sunday to screw you, and I would argue a lot more than that. There is no bigger example of that than Congress, who the intelligence community has dirt on more than likely all of them, and have used it since its inception to bully all of them to get what they want. Gabbard was a threat to that, so the intelligence community sicked their dogs on her to get her to back off. Gabbard's hearing came to a head when the subject of Edward Snowden arose. Snowden, who famously leaked government surveillance documents to the press in the most courageous act of whistleblowing in modern history, was despised by the intelligence community. They didn't like that he had gotten away, that he had made a fool out of them, that he had tarnished their reputations. If they could, to be frank, they'd most likely kill him as punishment, and they tried with Julian Assange several times. Gabbard was asked point blank and repeatedly by both Senate Democrats and Republicans whether Edward Snowden was a traitor. And treason, for those who don't know, is the only punishment in the United States Constitution that is namely punishable by death. It's the most serious accusation you can levy at someone, both legally and morally. Betraying your country is no small thing, and the lackeys of the Senate Intel Committee tried to bait Gabbard into it. But she didn't fall for it. While she admitted that Snowden broke the law, which was true, she did not admit that Snowden was a traitor, which was untrue. The Senate committee tried to catch her several times in an unrelenting assault. But Gabbard, like Hegseth, stood firm. She did not break. Frankly, she didn't even bend. But most importantly of all, she did not lie. The same was true with Kash Patel, who was appointed by Donald Trump to oversee the most corrupt and terroristic organization inside of the United States government, the FBI. The FBI, which has been so cruelly weaponized under previous administrations, was among the least trustworthy institution in our government. The prior director, Republican Chris Wray, and his boss, Democrat Merrick Garland, had shamed whistleblowers, arrested pro-life protesters, tortured January 6 prisoners in prison, and took license plates of school board moms. Patel himself, a longtime defense attorney and DOJ official, had said he would close the Hoover building and move the agents out into the field on day one, which he's promised to do, and has done. He promised to come in and rip the FBI to shreds, release the Diddy and Epstein files, and to get the FBI doing what it was initially set out to do: be federal cops and chase down bad guys. The entrenched governmental establishment who used the FBI as their version of the Stasi went white in the face when Kash Patel said this. Within 4 months of his tenure, Patel has made remarkable progress. Even though the disappointment of the Epstein files has left many with a lot to be desired, Patel has quietly thrown multiple members of the FBI's most wanted list into prison. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you had even heard of the FBI's most wanted list? In my adult life, the answer is never. In addition, he extradited the mastermind behind the Abbey bombing in Afghanistan, and just last week imprisoned over 200 child sex offenders. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and exactly what Kash Patel was commissioned by Donald Trump to do. Their jobs: imprisoning bad guys, and not American citizens. You don't hear anything about this from our political class. They're all too worried that they're next. And the hypocrisy of the American left was truly shown when Robert F. Kennedy Jr., hailing from the most iconic Democratic family of the 20th century, underwent confirmation to become the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kennedy, who had spent years advocating for things like clean drinking water and the health of children, was raked over coals by all the people who supposedly idolized his father, as well as swamp creature Republicans who outsourced their disgust by citing things like his stance on abortion and free markets, two things that had nothing to do with making America healthy again. The crescendo of their hypocrisy was reached when RFK was confronted by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, two Medicare for All advocates who supposedly cared about health care. Sanders, a now exposed plant for DC insiders and lobbyists, held up a screenshot from one of RFK's websites of onesies with vaccine jokes on them. Warren, attempting to strong-arm him, yelled belligerently about how he should never leave HHS and shill for a big food or pharma company. And RFK, like Hegseth, Gabbard, and Patel, refused to break. When asked by Sanders about whether he regretted selling the onesies, he said no. Not only did he have nothing to do with those organizations in his current position, he also stood by what he said. When Warren screeched at him about using his current position to become a lobbyist, he literally laughed in her face. As it turned out, in data published after the hearing, there were no two bigger recipients of pharma donor money than Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Rounding out the five horsemen, there was no bigger earthquake that happened in the first part of the second Trump presidency than the announcement of Elon Musk running the Department of Government Efficiency. The meme-inspired Doge started off as such, a relatively unserious thing that no one thought would take off. How many times did either Democrats or Republicans talked about trimming government spending and going back to quote-unquote small government? The answer, a lot. Nothing had ever happened. No one, neither citizen nor politician, actually expected progress. But both parties turned out to be wrong. Musk came out swinging from the jump, targeting massive budgets of both federal agencies and NGOs on charges of taxpayer waste, fraud, and abuse. The United States government, for the longest time, has never opened its books. You can never question what actually went on under the hood of the government. That was only for our moral betters, for our self-anointed elites that felt that only they could truly know what was going on below the surface. Not only did Musk rip off the Band-Aid, he rubbed salt in the wound. The first organization he targeted was USAID, an NGO founded ironically by President Kennedy to, supposedly, distribute foreign aid to those in need. But this wasn't the 1960s anymore. Due to heroic reporting from people like Mike Benz, the real purpose of USAID was far more sinister, a tool of the CIA to overturn foreign governments, propagandize America's imperialistic pretenses around the world, and, overall, to steal money. When Musk outed USAID's corruption, the outcry was so overwhelming that the Trump administration had no choice but to shut it down completely. In an absolutely wild scene, President Trump closed its doors, firing above 90% of the staff, and cut the spigot off completely. The Bureau of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, and ATF, and the Department of Education, incredibly, followed shortly after, two conservative victories once thought to be pipe dreams. The early work of Doge sent Democrats into a frenzy. Musk had gone for their sacred cows, their black box budgets, and used to promote their own interests and preserve their power. For the modern political elite, still in shambles after the Trump election, this was the only chance at long-term power preservation. They ranted and raved, shouted and screamed. But no one responded to their cries. They were simply shouting into the void. When someone tells you why they hate something, don't believe them. Instead, look deeper into their reasonings, their real motives for doing so. That, not surface-level justifications, will tell you all that you need to know. Our ruling class doesn't hate Pete Hegseth because he's some kind of a drunken misogynist, or Tulsi Gabbard because she's an implanted foreign spy, or Kash Patel because he's a partisan crusader, or Bobby Kennedy because he's a nut job, or Elon Musk because he's a technocratic oligarch. Instead, the hatred of these five, and many more, is far more simple than that. They're honest. They tell the truth. They are doing what they have been charged to do by their voters. Be a conservative cabinet with conservative values. That's what a democracy is, after all. Doing the will of the people that put their trust and votes into you. The people screaming incessantly about this are deeply dangerous, malevolent, pathetic, and unserious. We would do well to notice this and to treat them as such.